Our presiding officer is retired military, Army colonel, highly distinguished. Comes from Iowa and travels home every weekend. She covers every county in Iowa. I cover, in a year, I cover every county in Delaware. Sometimes in a day, we only have 3. She's got probably 100 or so. But we have the opportunity to go home frequently to our respective states and to be with our families and just to be with the folks that we work for. I love doing it, and I know our presiding officer does as well. People come up to me. I go back and forth on the train just about every night. And we'll do that tonight, did it last night. And I feel really fortunate to be able to be that close to my constituents, actually serve in the Senate with my colleagues, and to actually live in my home state. It's a real blessing. People, I think I'm approachable. I know our presiding officer is, Senator Cornyn is, approachable, and people come up and talk to us all the time, which is good. Sometimes they just want to say hello. Sometimes they're asking how they're doing. More often than not, lately, Madam President, people say, I wouldn't want your job for anything. You got the worst job in the world. And I say, no, I feel really lucky. This is, throughout the 200 and some years we've been a country, there's about 1,800 people who have been privileged to serve here in this body. And we're fortunate that we are enabled to serve here today, especially during these challenging times. Since the 2016 election, however, a growing number of Delawareans and American citizens have approached me, whether it's at the ShopRite supermarket or on the Amtrak train, but they share with me their sense of uncertainty and their fears regarding the trajectory of our country. Specifically, they've expressed their uncertainty about the future of the special counsel's investigation, their fears that the president may put his own personal interest above the interest of all Americans and the Constitution of our country. As we pass the 1-year mark following Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein's appointment of former FBI Director Bob Mueller to become special counsel, I think it's worth remembering why the investigation began, what it has uncovered, where it's heading, and how we can uphold the rule of law and protect the investigation from political interference as we seek to ascertain the truth. Mr. President, Madam President, during the 2016 presidential campaign, our democracy was attacked by a foreign adversary. No shots were fired, no bombs were dropped, but let me be as clear as I can be. Russia attacked the United States of America. Using sophisticated cyber warfare, Russia interfered in our electoral process. As they have in other Western democracies, Russia borrowed from their tried and true playbook. Russian internet trolls posed as American citizens on Facebook and on Twitter. Russian shell companies funded political propaganda online, all with the intent of pitting us against one another and spreading misinformation among the American electorate. We also know that our nation's election infrastructure was targeted by the Kremlin and that Russian cyber attacks penetrated voting machines in some of our states, not all of our states, but a number of them. Madam President, Thomas Jefferson often wrote about the truth, including a famous description of a few truths that we still consider self-evident, namely that all men, I would add all women, are created equal and entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Later in life, Jefferson remarked, and this is a quote, "We are not afraid to follow the truth, wherever it may lead, nor to tolerate any error so long as reason is left free to combat it." Well, those words really ring true today, don't they? Jefferson also said, and I'll paraphrase him on this, Jefferson also used to say something to this effect: the people, that is the people of the United States, know the truth, we won't make a mistake. People know the truth, they won't make a mistake. Since the attack by Russia on our democracy, many patriotic Americans within federal law enforcement and our intelligence agencies have been heeding Jefferson's advice and seeking to follow the truth. Here's what we've learned. In a declassified report released in January of 2017, Our own intelligence agencies told us that, this is a quote from them, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at undermining public faith in the U.S. democratic process. Further, our own intelligence agencies told us that, and again quoting them, Russian efforts to influence the 2016 presidential election represent the most recent expression of Moscow's long-standing desire to undermine the U.S.-led liberal democratic order, close quote. Those same agencies, our own intelligence agencies, I think there's 17 in all, that combined to provide this report, but they've told us it'll happen again. Moscow, this is a quote again from our intelligence agency, Moscow will apply lessons learned from its Putin-ordered campaign aimed at the U.S. presidential election to future influence efforts worldwide, including against U.S. allies and their election processes. During recent testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee, Director of National Intelligence and our former Senate colleague right here, Dan Coates, a good friend of many of us from Indiana, he said these words, there should be no doubt that Russia perceives that its past efforts have been successful and views the 2018 midterm U.S. elections as a potential target for Russian influence operations. I'm going to read those words again. Our colleague Dan Coates, who sat over there, served with us for many years. He and I served together in the House before that. He was our ambassador to Germany. But now he's the Director of National Intelligence for our country, a Republican, by the way. But he said these words, there should be no doubt that Russia perceives that its past efforts have been successful and views the 2018 midterm U.S. elections as a potential target for Russian influence operations. And then he added, frankly, the United States is under attack. I approve that message. I don't welcome that message, but we need to hear that message. And we need to take it to heart. In response, we have, I would add, a responsibility not to any political party, but to our Constitution and responsibility to the American people to band together as we would following any attack on our country. We have a responsibility to fight back, to protect and safeguard our democracy, and to ensure that it never happens again. And we also have a responsibility, again, one that rises above political party, to determine whether the Trump campaign may have had inappropriate contact with Russia during that campaign. This responsibility is shared between Congress and the executive branch, including different committees in the House and Senate, as well as the Department of Justice, the FBI, and our intelligence agencies. Unfortunately, our president has rejected this responsibility from the start. Let's not forget, President Trump fired former FBI Director Jim Comey and publicly stated it was because of the Russian investigation. President Trump told NBC News, I'm going to quote him, when I decided to fire Comey, I said to myself, you know, this Russian thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won. Close quote. Those are President Trump's words to NBC News. Because Attorney General Sessions has recused himself from matters involving Russia and the 2016 election, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, a lifelong Republican, appointed by President Trump to his current position, made the decision to appoint a special counsel to continue the Russian investigation. Let me just take a moment to remind the American people about the background and the character of this special counsel. Bob Mueller has spent his life serving our country with distinction. Our presiding officer, Army, highly decorated. Yours truly, Navy, 23 years all in, active duty and reserve. Here's what Bob Mueller received. in decoration, some of his decorations, as an officer in the Marine Corps during the Vietnam War, a war in which I served as well. He received the Bronze Star. He earned 2 Navy Commendation Medals and the Purple Heart, all as an officer in the Marine Corps during the Vietnam War. After a career in federal law enforcement and private law practice, President George W. Bush nominated him to serve as our FBI director. And Bob Mueller guided the FBI in the aftermath of the September 11th terrorist attacks. A steady hand during uncertain times, Director Mueller gained the respect and the admiration of the men and women of the FBI, as well as those of us here on Capitol Hill. During my tenure as chairman and ranking member of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, I had the opportunity to meet with Director Mueller on a range of issues, including protecting our nation from cybersecurity threats. Let me just say, I think maybe in the 17 years I've been here, the best briefing I've ever received on cybersecurity was from Bob Mueller. The very best briefing I ever received was from Bob Mueller. I also got to know him personally, know his wife. My wife know his wife, and we believe he is guided by very strong core values. Figure out the right thing to do, just do it. Not what is easy, not what is expedient, but what is right. To treat other people the way we want to be treated. To focus on excellence in everything we do. If it isn't perfect, make it better. And when you know you're right, you're sure you're right. Never give up. Those are his values. And I suspect they're the values of many of us who serve here. Bob Mueller is a man of unimpeachable integrity. There may be no better person suited to this task of special counsel. I have every confidence that he will follow the truth wherever it may lead him and those he leads. But just don't take my word for it. Don't take my word for it. When the Deputy Attorney General appointed him to the position of special counsel just a little more than a year ago, his selection drew a particularly resounding endorsement from those of us who serve here in the Senate, not just on this side, but in particular on the other side of the aisle. Here's what John McCain said about Bob Mueller. Robert Mueller is a great choice for special counsel. John went on to add that he, quote, is confident that Mr. Mueller will fully investigate all aspects of Russia's interference in our election, close quote. Senator Burr said, and I quote, by having someone like Bob Mueller head this investigation assures the American people that there's no undue influence, be it here or be it at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue or within the Justice Department or the FBI. Those are the words of Senator Richard Burr, North Carolina, Republican. Even former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, with whom I served in the House, said this of Bob Mueller. Robert Mueller is a superb choice to be special counsel. His reputation is impeccable for honesty and integrity. Close quote. Well, I've not known Robert Mueller for as long as some who serve here, but I've known him for a while. I've had a chance to work with him on some important issues and matters for our country, for the security of our country. He's as fine as any public servant as I've ever known and served with. Unfortunately, President Trump has not been as praiseworthy of our special counsel as the senators I just quoted and former House Speaker I just quoted. President Trump has repeatedly used his Twitter account to call special counsel Mueller's investigation a witch hunt. A witch hunt? Mr. President, in February, 13 Russian individuals and 3 Russian companies were charged with breaking U.S. law and interfering in the 2016 election. 13. The indictment details an elaborate coordinated scheme to disrupt our election. Moreover, 3 Trump campaign officials have pled guilty to crimes that include lying to the FBI about contacts with Russia during the campaign and conspiracy to defraud the United States. And the former Trump campaign manager is currently facing similar charges. Despite the progress of the investigation, we know from news report that President Trump repeatedly has considered firing Director Mueller and Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein. That would be a grave mistake. That would be a very grave mistake. Instead of exercising presidential leadership and holding Russia accountable and safeguarding our upcoming election, President Trump continues to use dangerous rhetoric directed toward the special counsel's investigation, as well as at the people who work for us, serve us at the FBI and the Department of Justice, who deserve our thanks, not our scorn. Instead of exercising presidential leadership and holding Russia accountable and safeguarding our upcoming election, President Trump is now demanding a counter-investigation. Instead of exercising presidential leadership and holding Russia accountable and safeguarding election, President Trump is now undermining the special counsel's investigation while risking the identity of American intelligence sources. Despite this failure of presidential leadership, the special counsel's investigation must go on. There's a former Methodist minister in southern Delaware, town of Seaford, now deceased Pastor Reynolds, wonderful man, and the one who was good to give me advice during my career, particularly when I was governor. And one day he gave me this advice. He said, Governor, he said, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. I said, would you say that again, Pastor? He said, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And I think in this case, the main thing is for us to find out and ascertain the truth. Special Counsel Mueller must be allowed to follow the truth, no matter where it leads. No matter how uncomfortable that makes President Trump or other people, no matter how uncomfortable that makes Vladimir Putin. We must continue to ensure that Special Counsel Mueller has the time and the resources that he needs to follow the truth and bring this investigation to a conclusion. We must also protect the Special Counsel from undue political influence and send a strong signal to President Trump that firing Bob Mueller or Rod Rosenstein without clear legal justification would pose a grave threat to our constitutional system of checks and balances. To be clear, we can't pass a bill to end President Trump's erratic threats on Twitter, though I know there are a few people, some here, who would support such a proposal. However, here's what we can do. We passed a bipartisan bill introduced by Senators Kuhn, Tillis, Booker, and Graham. A bipartisan bill to protect the special counsel's investigation. That legislation is called the Special Counsel Independence and Integrity Act, will ensure that the special counsel can only be fired for good cause by a senior Justice Department official, and the reason must be provided in writing. It will ensure that in the event of his firing, the special counsel can seek expedited judicial review of his removal. And it will preserve all the documents and materials related to this investigation. I want to thank our four colleagues, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, for introducing this bipartisan bill. I support it. I urge its swift passage. Passing this bill will demonstrate to the American people that despite the uncertainties and maybe the fears at this moment, we still have a system of checks and balances. It still works. It's been working for 240 years. There are more constitutions in this world modeled after the United States Constitution than any other constitution ever. Not only is the most emulated Constitution, it's the longest living Constitution on the face of the earth. And it has this intricate system of checks and balances that our founding fathers, who convened in Philadelphia 240 years ago, developed the Constitution that we know of today and sent it out to the 13 colonies to debate it and consider whether or not they wanted to ratify it. And the first state to ratify the Constitution was the state of Delaware. And that Constitution is something that we especially revere in the first state. But if we allow the system of checks and balances called for in that Constitution, if we allow it to work, it will eventually lead us to the truth, which is what we should all see. Not just here in this Senate, not just here in the Congress, not just in one party or the other, not just any one state or the other, all of us, all of us. If the unthinkable were to happen and the special counsel were fired on a whim, I believe the legislation I've just talked about would help us preserve the Russian investigation and the rule of law. And the rule of law. Well, as I begin to conclude, let me just say this. Like Special Counsel Mueller, Congressmen must not be afraid to follow the truth. We must not be distracted by the president's tweets and other attempts to undermine this important investigation. We must keep the main thing. Special Counsel Mueller and his team must be allowed to finish this investigation. And Congress, especially our Republican colleagues, must do our part to protect the investigation and insist that the president stop political interference and gamesmanship. Taken together, I believe these actions will allow us to emerge from this moment, this especially challenging moment in our country, as we often have following other crises throughout our history. We'll emerge stronger and more resilient, and we'll emerge deeply proud that we upheld our responsibility to the Constitution of the American people. Madam President, in closing, want to mention, maybe this happens to you too when you're back home or traveling around the country. A lot of times people come up to me, maybe not every day, but certainly every week, several times a week, people come up to me. Some are Democrats, some are Republican, some are independent, some are probably not even registered to vote. And they say, I fear for the future of our country. I don't think it's ever been this bad before. We've never seen it this bad before. And I remind them of the words of Harry Truman, who once served in this body, as a senator from Missouri, later as vice president and then president of our country. Harry Truman used to say, the only thing new in the world is the history we forgot or never learned. Think about that. The only thing new in the world is the history we forgot or never learned. My sister and I grew up in a town, Danville, Virginia, right on the North Carolina border. Last capital of the Confederacy. A lot of people thought the last capital of the Confederacy was Richmond, Virginia. It wasn't. Jefferson Davis and those closest to him got out of Richmond, headed south, and they ended up in Danville, Virginia to make their last stands. And that's where my sister and I grew up. We saw prejudice and discrimination as little kids up close and personal. I will never forget it. But there are some people in Danville, Virginia who are still fighting the Civil War 150 years after it was over, at least in their minds. But during that Civil War, 800,000 men were killed, both sides, all in. 800,000. Hundreds of thousands of more men, women, children were wounded, crippled. When the war was over, what happened? When the war was over, our president was assassinated, Lincoln. His successor, Andrew Johnson, senator from Tennessee, who also served here, he was impeached. And somehow we got through that Civil War, the assassination of a president, the impeachment of a president, and we made it to the 20th century, just in time to fight not one but two world wars, led them, won them, led the world, our allies, to victory in the Cold War, led the world out of the Great Depression, And when the sun came up on the 21st century, on January 1st, 2001, here's where America was as a nation. We had the strongest economy on earth. We had the most productive workforce on earth. For the first time since 1968, we actually had a balanced budget. Not just one, not two, not three, but 4 balanced budgets the last 4 years of the Clinton presidency. And while we had a Democratic president and administration, we had a Republican Congress. And if I'm not mistaken, the chairman of the House Budget Committee was very much involved in these balanced budgets, was a Republican from Ohio, my friend, our friend, John Casey, former congressman, now governor of Ohio. So we had the strongest economy, the most productive workforce, 4 balanced budgets in a row. And on January 1st, 2001, we were the most admired nation on earth. We were the strongest force for justice on earth. That's where we were. After all that bad stuff for 150 years, all those challenges for 150 years, beginning with and following the Civil War. If we can get through all of that, folks, we can get through this. If we can get through all of that, we can get through this. And in the words of Jefferson, if the American people know the truth, we won't make a mistake. That's what Bob Mueller and his folks are trying to get to. And it's important that they succeed. With that, Madam President, I note the absence of a quorum.